Welcome. I'm Sarah Hoffpower with Flourish Consulting, and today I'm going to speak to you about resilience building in our Tuesdays Toolbox. And the techniques we're going to cover today are adapting to changes. This is something that is very important to resilience because there's always change in a difficult situation. Either we're gaining something or we're losing something, and that's what creates a change in our life. And the way that we respond to it can have a profound effect on our well-being and for those around us in our family and in our community. So there's three key elements to adapting to change from a resilience perspective. I'm wondering if you're hearing talk about a new normal in the community. I did today when I attended a webinar with Mayor Cantrell and the president of Jefferson Parish. They were discussing their plans for introducing phase one of reopening the community. And this term was mentioned many times. First of all, unimaginable changes took place in our community, in our churches, stores, work, schools, and homes, you name it. When we had our first coronavirus diagnosis in early March. Now we're facing the reopening, and unknowable changes to reopen our communities are on the horizon. Mayor Cantrell spoke strongly about data and monitoring data, but there is still quite a bit of unknown as to what exactly are going to be the guidelines for reopening. So we have to be vigilant in staying informed, and that's one of the things we want to do for you here with Tuesday's Toolbox. And that's an important part about resilience, is being informed and being prepared. But the way that we're going into this, the way that I visualized it in the webinar, was it reminds me of a comparison my boss once made on a new program. He said, hey, we're going to build this plane while we're flying it. Now that kind of scared me a lot, because one, I have vertigo, two, I'm scared of heights, and I did not want to fly a plane that hadn't been built yet. But I got the meaning of his remark, and that we were being innovative and we were being adventurers, and we were going to be the new change in healthcare. So that part of it was exciting. But in today's webinar, I heard more fear. One pastor who was talking about how this impacts churches and congregations was saying, this new normal is driving me crazy, but we've got to do what they're telling us to do. And he said that he's telling his congregation to prepare for things that will not be the same. Well, how does resilience tell us that we can do that? Resilience studies and also studies in positive psychology have confirmed certainties of responding to change in a healthy and strong way. And the first element of responding and adapting to change is being flexible. The flexibility toward the changes in our lives eases our adjustment. If we resist and if we dislike or if we try to avoid it, there's going to be more mixed emotions and maybe confusion and a feeling of not being grounded. And that's because our mind is hardwired to protect us from the danger. We talked about this in the first session, that our mind wants to protect us and maintain the status quo in our life. And so we normally don't respond automatically to change in a flexible way. Flexibility is something that we learn and practice. And in our toolbox, we learn tools and skills to recognize when our natural defenses are triggered, that shallow breathing, the chest tightness, the, feeling anxiety. And we learned a calming exercise and a wellness check-in. And everyone who I've spoken to or who has written in the evaluation said that these tools were very calming for them and helped them take their mind off of what was happening. So that's the first step in being flexible, is to slow down the natural trigger defense mechanisms that we have. And flexibility then opens up options for us to choose after we've practiced the calmness and accept the challenges of change. Now, I'll give you an example of some things that our mind might do that produces a more rigid response. So when something changes, if you judge it or label it as being good or bad or better or worse, the chances are that you're not going to feel very flexible toward it. You might try to find ways to defend yourself against it or resist it. The other thing is that if you're judging how you're responding to changes in your life and you're saying to yourself, well, I should be able to do that and I shouldn't do that, that type of guilt playing on ourselves is a way to bring rigidity to a situation. So catch yourself labeling situations. Try to just recognize them for what they are, define it, recognize it, acknowledge the feelings of grief or happiness or anger that go along with the change. Avoid naming it and labeling it and judging it. The second key element in our adapting to change in the most resilient way is optimism. Now, this may not be your first response toward change because our defensive mechanisms and our mind typically warns us that the worst is yet to come, right? All of our stories as when we were a kid was the sky is falling and the worst is yet to come. And, we often have a catastrophic point of view when our normal lives are disrupted in major ways. So when you start to feel that type of catastrophic feeling coming on you, use the wellness check tool to recognize when you're seeing change as this catastrophe or this impossible situation. I call it catching our inner Eeyore. If you've ever read Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore is actually one of my favorite characters. He's so depressed and pessimistic, but he's adorable. And I worked with a nurse once, side story, who every time I would say to her, "Good morning," she would say, "What's so good about it?" And I would just laugh because, I could think of a lot of things that were good about it, but she certainly couldn't. Well, when you catch your inner Eeyore, telling you that what's so good about it, this is going to suck, you need to, step up and argue with him as though it's another person whose mission in life is to make your life miserable and prove that that inner voice is wrong. One of the ways that I do that is I begin, instead of focusing on what my inner Eeyore is saying is so horrible, I start thinking about the things that I'm grateful for, the things that I appreciate. And then I also think I work on my perspective. How am I seeing this? And I guess the most famous perspective that everyone's heard of is whether a glass is half empty or half full. Of course, the half full perspective is your optimism at play. So put those perspectives to work that include positive interpretations. And one way of doing it in this current time of change would be to say, acknowledge the difficulties and the challenges, but this is not going to last forever. Things will pass. Life will begin to get better. I heard a great analogy the other day about every red traffic light eventually turns green. This has been one long red light, okay, but it eventually is going to turn green. So let's try to hang on to that optimistic perspective. The third thing that I wanted to share is that you have a lot of control over is making a plan for what your best personal self is going to look like in this new normal. Your adjustment to change, part of that is accepting the changes that you cannot control. Sure, there are things that are happening that you absolutely cannot influence. But we saw empty shelves in the grocery store. We had to adapt to that, for an example. But use all of your strengths and resources and tools that you have control over to respond to the changes in your life and in your family and community. Focus on what you can do rather than what you cannot do. Some very tangible ways to do that is to create a schedule, a routine for your life. You might schedule in that favorite TV show, or some type of, maybe you have an exercise recording that you, or yoga, or some kind of practice that you like to follow, and schedule that into your day, something pleasant, and then proactively work a plan that is going to bring your new personal new normal to life in a way that you want it to look like. It's not going to look the same for all of us. We are all different and independent human beings, and take control of the things that you have control over. So the resilience tools I am sharing with you today include flexibility, which includes refraining from judgment and labeling of the situations you're in. Practicing optimism, see the glass half full, and proactively plan what your new normal is going to look like, using the things that are in your control and that you have influence over. As Powell said, next week, we're going to host a private and unrecorded Zoom meeting. We're going to connect over these ideas. We're going to share how we use them in real life. Bring your questions, bring your answers. We're going to encourage connection virtually in our new normal at Gallo Mechanical. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Yvonne and to Powell if you have any last closing remarks. And I will also post, I'm going to pull up the slide with the phone number that Powell just referred to.